Today, the Huai River Valley in central China is a quiet, fertile stretch of agricultural land, but buried under the topsoil is the wreckage of a violent, suppressed history. In the 1950s, this river was walled off by the Banqiao Dam. Locals called it the Iron Dam. Engineers promised it was indestructible, built to easily brush off a 1-in-1,000-year flood. The dam was the crown jewel of Chairman Mao's Harnessing the Huai River campaign. Tens of thousands of laborers carved the reservoir out of the earth by hand, driven by a fierce national pride and a strict mandate to tame nature. Then came August 1975. The iron wall shattered. It unleashed an inland tsunami that wiped out 61 downstream dams in a lethal domino effect, killing up to 250,000 people. By the numbers, it remains the deadliest structural failure in human history. Yet, if you lived outside of the province at the time, you likely never heard a single word about it. To understand how an unconditionally unbreakable dam breaks, we have to look at the anatomy of the storm and uncover how a government manages to hide a disaster the size of New Jersey. The catalyst arrived in early August 1975. Super Typhoon Nina slammed into the coast, but instead of breaking apart over land like ocean storms normally do, it retained its structure and carved a path deep into the Chinese interior. As Nina pushed north, the weather system slammed into a massive, heavy cold front pushing south. The cold air mass acted like an invisible atmospheric brick wall. This radar map shows the collision. Stalled over the Banqiao Reservoir, the typhoon hovered and wrung itself out. This chart reveals the gap between engineering and reality. The design limit was 12 inches over 3 days. Nina delivered 42 inches in just 24 hours. Nature bypassed the engineering models entirely. This was a 1-in-2,000-year downpour that gorged the reservoir millions of gallons past its physical breaking point. By the night of August 7th, the situation on the dam's crust was pure chaos. Storm winds had severed the telegraph lines. In total darkness, hundreds of workers scrambled through the driving rain, desperately stacking sandbags to raise the wall by just a few inches. This cross-section shows the fatal vulnerability of an earth-fill dam. Unlike concrete, an earthen dam relies entirely on compacted soil. If water breaches the crust, it immediately carves away the downstream support. Once overtopping starts, structural collapse is a mathematical certainty. Knowing the wall was doomed, the operators began firing warning flares into the suffocating sky. They hoped to trigger an evacuation, but through the blinding rain of a super typhoon, the sleeping towns below saw absolutely nothing. Shortly after 1 a.m., the crust failed. The walls sheared apart, and 600 million cubic meters of bloated reservoir water detonated all at once. The wave that entered the valley was a liquid battering ram. It formed a 10-meter-high wall, moving at 50 kilometers per hour, churning with thick mud, massive boulders, and the shattered concrete of the dam itself. The Banqiao Dam failed to hold back the river, but its sudden disintegration weaponized the entire reservoir into an unstoppable inland tsunami. As the water levels surged, the solution should have been standard protocol: open the spillways and release the pressure. But on the night of August 7th, the dam's mechanical limits made that impossible. The bottleneck was a relic of the construction phase 2 decades earlier. During the initial design, hydrologist Chen Xing flagged a specific flaw in the dam's blueprints. Chen argued that the Soviet-inspired plans were dangerously lopsided, designed to hoard as much water as possible for irrigation, while leaving the reservoir under-equipped to dump it during a flood. He lobbied for 12 massive sluice gates to ensure safety. Instead, project managers, squeezed by budget cuts and the need to please superiors, slashed that number from 12 down to 5. When Chen refused to stay silent, the political machinery turned against him. He was branded a right-wing opportunist and formally purged from his post. The 1975 collapse was a meteorological event, but the catastrophe was a political one. By silencing scientific expertise, the state had hardwired the dam for failure long before the rain ever started falling. When the sun rose on August 8th, the landscape was unrecognizable. The massive surge of water had triggered a chain reaction, snapping 61 additional dams down the river basin. In a single night, the initial wave had drowned an estimated 26,000 people. but the dying had barely started. The floodwaters settled into a stagnant, toxic inland sea. Over the next several weeks, millions of stranded survivors, cut off from destroyed roads and rail lines, succumbed to exposure, starvation, and rampant dysentery. Facing an unfathomable death toll, the Chinese Communist Party opted for suppression. Deep into the political turmoil of the Cultural Revolution, admitting that the prized iron dam had failed was too humiliating. The state immediately classified the disaster as a top-level secret. For 30 years, an absolute media blackout swallowed the truth. Survivors were forbidden from speaking out. The international community remained completely blind to an event that had wiped out hundreds of thousands of lives. The archives were finally unsealed in 2005. The declassified records exposed the exact scale of the tragedy, and history ultimately vindicated Chen Xing. When the government rebuilt the river valley's infrastructure, they used the massive spillway designs he had begged for half a century prior. Governments can mobilize massive labor forces to pour iron and concrete, and they can enforce decades of silence to protect their pride. But engineering requires an immense respect for the environment it operates in, because nature always dictates the final outcome.